Hello, hello, my friends. AmyR here with Prairie Paper and Ink. Welcome back to my face and my card making space and a new card and video. And I am part of a blog hop. Simon Says Stamps release was this week for February. It's called Splendor. And I will have a link to the release in the description box below the video. You can check out all the new things. There's a lot. There's stamps and wafer dies and stencils and new inks. 3 more colors were released for the Pawsitively saturated ink line. We've got 3 more shades of yellow. So I think these will be quite popular. I did use them on today's card. I did some heat embossing and some die cutting, and of course I went with the florals because, shocker, I love all things floral. So I used the new inks along with some of the other Pawsitively saturated inks and did some very simple ink blending on the die cuts. And yeah, keep watching. I'll show you guys how I made them. And then, like I said, this is part of a blog hop, so I will have a link, like I always do, directly to my blog post. Highly recommend checking it out because I will have a list of links to everyone else participating today. Tons of inspiration, giveaways, all the fun things. So expand the description box below the video to check all that out. And yeah, keep watching, and I'm going to show you guys how I made this card. This card just screams spring, doesn't it? And love it. Very much in the mood for spring. We still got a ways to go up here in Saskatchewan, but can't wait. Can't wait. So to start off with, I'm using the new Topography background stamp. And I've got a piece of smooth white cardstock that's A2 sized. And this is a red rubber on cling mount background stamp. So I just pulled off the backing, just stuck it right to my work surface. And then I'm using anti-static powder on the cardstock. That just helps prevent the embossing powder from sticking to anything other than the inked up image. So I'm inking up said image with clear embossing ink. And then I'm just going to flip that cardstock right onto it and press that down with my fingers. Once I get that done, I am going to use detail white embossing powder. And honestly, I could have left it at that, just the, melt the white heat embossing powder. It's very subtle, but I do love like the look of a white heat embossed image on white cardstock, like background images, things like that, because it's subtle. It lets whatever else you want to put on top of it, take center stage. But the embossing powder, when you melt it, it's shiny. So it's there, but it's not distracting. Anyway, that said, I was going to do ink blending over this. There's a lot of ideas with this background stamp. There's so many different ways you can kind of take it, in my opinion. So we'll see. I melted everything till it's smooth and melted. Got to tilt, especially when it's like white on white or when I'm using clear embossing powder, those sorts of things. I got to tilt it back and forth in the light to actually see that everything is smooth, shiny, melted. If there's any dull grainy areas, just hit those with my heat tool till it's all melted. Once it's good to go, I'm going to do very simple ink blending. I'm using one of the OG colored trios from the Simon Says Stamp Pawsitively saturated ink lines. In fact, I think this was like the second one. Yeah, this is Pawsitively saturated ink trio number 2. So it's the celery, Limelicious, and Perfection inks. I started with celery and blended that from what will be the bottom of this card front and kind of blended that up to the top and let it just fade to white. And then I went in with the Limelicious, the medium ink, and blended that about halfway up. And then the darkest shade, Perfection, I only blended that on the top or the bottom quarter of the card roughly. So I've got a nice little kind of gradient going on there. And because the image was heat embossed, all resists the ink. And I don't think I ended up showing it on camera, but I still went over it with my microfiber cloth just to wipe off any ink that might have been sitting on the embossing powder. It just kind of depends sometimes on the inks and the image and things like that. So I set that aside, and then I just die cut pieces of the same smooth white cardstock with the new fine floral stem wafer die set, which I told you guys, like it's a floral. It's a die cut floral. I already love it. So I decided for this card to do, again, just ink blending. Like, this is a easy way to add color to die cuts. And this is especially nice if you don't have, you know, a big variety of color cardstock. Because yeah, there's so much you can do with just white cardstock and then inks. And inks you use for stamping, you can use for blending, and then you can use to blend onto die cuts to give them a color. So I'm using the same green ink. I'm using Perfection ink. And I'm just using some waffle flower brushes because these kind of let me get in there and add the color where I wanted it. So of course I added that to the stems. And then I took, this is a 1+, yeah, 1+ shader brush. And then I'm using a 0+, the little teeny tiny blender brush. And I'm using the exact same ink, but I'm just adding like more layers of it to like that kind of the center of each little leaf trio on this. So it's just going to give it that little extra something. And then for all the blooms, I'm using the new yellow ink trio. And these are Butter, Zest, and Honey. And they're what I would call like slightly muted shades, because if you're familiar with this ink line, the other yellow combo, the original one, is much bright, like much brighter colors. Like everything was very bright. And then over the last however many months, Simon's been releasing more and more trios of, you know, more muted kind of shades, like kind of filling out all of these colors. And these yellows are definitely that. I was really excited when I opened the box and I was like, yes, more yellows, hooray. They're very pretty, even though I've talked about this before. Filming with yellows, at least for me, filming and trying to take photos with anything that I've used yellow on is just frustrating. It really is. They're much prettier in real life than they look on camera, but anywho. I worked lightest to darkest with these blooms, and very simple. I've sped this up quite a bit, but this was very simple to do. I started with the larger brush first and the lightest shade of ink, and I was just like applying it and pulling it from the center of each petal, and that was it. And then I did the medium shade and the darker shade with the smaller brush, and it just slapped the ink on. Very, very simple. And I've mentioned this a million times, but with the positively saturated inks, they smooth out as they dry, like as they absorb into the cardstock. So I don't worry too much about my blends. They don't need to look perfect because they just kind of do that on their own. So I blended those yellows onto those flowers, and then I die cut just scraps of the same smooth white cardstock using the little, it's called Simple Flowers wafer dies. And I took the little solid die cuts. And on these, I'm blending one of the sort of purpley blue trios. This is and same thing, starting like going just lightest to darkest, and that's Heather, Violet, and Iris inks, and just using that same or one of the same tiny little blending brushes. And with these I did the same thing. I just started in the center and pulled the color out, and I wasn't worried about if there was going to be any little like blotchy ink, which you can see there wasn't, but if there had been, I wasn't worried about how the centers looked because I'm going to actually cover them with the little die cut pieces for the centers. So all of the little flower centers for both sets of die cuts I stuck, and I'm sticking all this to my waffle flower grip mat. I don't think I'd mentioned that, but that's what I was using. So for all the little die cut flower centers, I just used two different shades of kind of browns. I used a WOODSY and MOCHA inks, and again another little tiny blending brush, and just got that color onto there, blended them together. And then putting the fine floral stem together, it's simple. You just layer them. That's it. I just offset them just a little bit. You know, you could kind of do whatever you want, really. So I just offset them a little bit and then adhered the little flower centers to them. And then with the little tiny flowers, same thing. Just stuck little dabs of glue, glued on those little centers, and we're good to go. So I just put little dabs of glue onto all the little flower centers, and then I just use my little embellishment wand to pick up the flower centers, stick them down, let the glue dry. So after I'd done that, I took out a scrap of just black cardstock and decided to make this into a birthday card. And I'm using the CZ Designs new Birthday Basics stamp set, and chose one of the just happy birthday sentiments. And same thing, lined it up in my MISTI, used my anti-static powder on the black cardstock, and I'm going to ink up and stamp the sentiment with clear embossing ink, and I'm going to ink this up a couple times to make sure I get the entire sentiment stamped. going to coat that with the Detail White embossing powder, tap off the excess, heat that until everything is smooth and shiny. And once this one is melted, I give it a couple seconds to just cool off, and then I just wipe off that excess anti-static powder with my microfiber cloth. Once I've got that wiped off, I'm going to use the coordinating wafer die to die cut the sentiment out. So got that lined up, tape that into place so that it doesn't shift when I run it through my die cut machine. And then I've got my sentiment. So now I got to do the inside of the card, and my card base is going to be a top folding A2 white note card, so 4 1/4 by 5 1/2. And I'm going to stamp that topography background onto the inside of the card. So I used my very well loved piece of Post-it tape just to mask off right where the score line is on the card, so I don't stamp past the score line. And then I inked up the topography stamp with the lightest shade of green ink, so that's the celery ink. And then pressed the card base onto this background stamp. So now the inside's got the pattern stamped onto it. And then I'm going to transfer this back to my MISTI, and then I'm going to stamp another couple of the sentiments from that same Birthday Basics stamp set. So got those all lined up, and then those I'm going to stamp with my VersaFine Clair Nocturne ink. So, and then like rubbing the stamps, because with clear, like good quality clear photopolymer stamps, when they're brand new, a lot of times they have like it's like a coating or a residue. It's part of the like washing out process when they're like manufacturing the stamps. And when they're brand new like that, they're you can tell like they're extra shiny, and you'll find that like inks will bead up on them, like they won't stamp as well, and they just need to be conditioned. So you saw me there, I was just rubbing my fingers on the stamps. That's basically what I do, and it just works fine before I ink them up, and they stamp great. So I did that, and then big shocking surprise. Again, if you guys have been watching my videos lately, you know I'm back on the baker's twine kick on all my cards. So I had some yellow baker's twine, wrap that around my card front, use my trusty little reverse tweezers to help me hold the knot in place while I tied the bow. And then I'm going to adhere these fine floral stems, and one of them I just trimmed off one of the little flowers. So I'm going to adhere these directly to this card front panel with my craft tacky glue, and then figure out where I'm going to like place all of the extras. So I got that other flower that I cut off. I decided to like stick that in the upper corner of the card, and then the little individual florals as well as the sentiment I'm just adhering with thin foam squares. So it'll give them a little bit of dimension, but it's not going to make it like extra bulky. So I just popped those into place with those foam squares, and then flipped over this background and trimmed off all of the little stems and whatnot that were hanging off the edges. So just using the like edge of the cardstock as my guide, and just trimmed all those off. And then I'm going to adhere this to my card front. And this time I didn't trim down the card front at all, so it's the full like size of the card. So it's just going to cover this entire card front. So I've got that adhered into place onto the card base. And then as my final little bit of embellishment, part of the new release are they're Pawsitively Dazzling gems. And they're shiny, so of course I love them. My inner magpie was like, yes. So I used several of these, kind of sprinkled them around the card, and then once I was happy with where I'd put them, I just adhered them into place with the little dabs of craft tacky glue. Then you just gotta let the glue dry, and this card is complete. And I know I didn't add any splatter or any glitter. Shocking, I know, but I was having fun ink blending. It's also very satisfying. So like I said in the intro, I'll have a link to the release. I'll have a supply list and link to all the supplies I'm using. And then, of course, a link to my blog post that I already mentioned. That will be all in the description box below the video. So you can just expand that to check it out if you're interested. Thank you all so very much for watching, thumbs upping, commenting, subscribe if you haven't. I'd love to have you. And I'll see you all very soon in the next video. Bye.